Welcome to Keeping Up with Data. Keeping Up with Data is the podcast that keeps data enthusiasts up to speed with what is happening in the data world. We bring in the leading minds from the data industry to talk all things career, news, embarrassing stories, failures and successes.
So welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with Data. You're joined by myself, James Ross.
Sean Gray.
And then we have the very lovely Vanessa. And like always, Vanessa, would love to just pass over to you and you can tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to everyone.
Thank you so much for having me. So my name is Vanessa Hall-Boman. I'm based up in Brisbane in sunny Queensland. So I had a bit of an unusual path into the data scape. So at uni, I did a commerce degree. I did an arts degree. I then decided to do a postgraduate degree in the Netherlands, looking at the role of the mass media in religious conflict. But it actually translates really well into what I do now, because it's people and math and trends and understanding how to understand people through trends. So it's that, and people are so unique, and also how they communicate is so different. So doing that postgrad, even though it doesn't seem like a very linear connection into the data space, it actually set me up so well. And it gave me much better tools to be able to understand all different types of people and how all different brains process information and also how they communicate their information. So after uni, I worked in advertising for a second and then jumped into the non-for-profit sector, where I've worked for the majority of my career. And then last year I had the opportunity to take a redundancy payment, which was a great opportunity for me and also for my family. And I very much acknowledge redundancy is not necessarily a privilege or seen as something really positive for a lot of people. It was within my circumstances, it was. And so I've taken that opportunity to, really kind of reframe what I want to do. And we're now working in a really great team. And for me personally, I love working somewhere where I have a social outcome, where I'm working towards a cause. And my passion has very much been within the healthcare space.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think there's a fair few things to definitely unpack there. First and foremost, like number of degrees you've done. How did you manage to then take that and then step into data? Like what was obviously the people correlation makes a lot of sense, but what kind of led to the degrees, and then what was the turning point of let's go into
where's the crossover? Religion and data.
Yes. So in my family, I'm the only child of a single parent. My mother is very highly educated as well. She's a psychologist. She is still working in emergency departments. She is an absolute firecracker, and would give Emily Gilmore a run for her money, in a very good way, in that she is a strong, smart woman who takes no prisoners. And so it was, in my upbringing, it was very much you go to university and you do degrees that will set you up for a job, but you also do degrees that set you up to be a full person. And so I did my undergraduates. I couldn't quite, I did an arts degree, but it was really interesting, and doing communications and marketing and those kinds of things. But I felt like you really needed the math background to be able to actually do it in the real world. So that's why I did the commerce degree and the arts degree. And then I did the master's degree to do that thing where to learn some more. And it was, I was, when I was just about to start university is when September 11 happened. So it was this incredibly transformative time in the world when all these really scary things were happening, and I lived on a very insular part of the Sunshine Coast, and I didn't understand, because life up there was so small and simple. So wanted to go out and learn.
Nice. I think that's a very interesting, like, I do appreciate being stuck in the sunshine, not stuck in, but living in the Sunshine Coast. That sort of definitely sheltered life, especially back then.
Yeah. People seem to talk a lot about degrees and must-haves for, like, I can remember 5-6 years ago, any position that we would work at was, you've got to have a degree, a specific degree related to this. But obviously No, in your case.
No, well, and it's so I started working in the charity sector, and so then it was just working in designing campaigns, and so it's the charity communicate, so like the tax appeal and Christmas appeal, and so working how to design those because they're incredibly complicated pieces of communications, but based on huge amounts of research and analytics into who the target audience is. So it was just like my master's degree, people and math, and understanding how people communicate and who people are and how they make their decisions. And so it was just continuing to work in that space, and it just evolved over time to I had an absolutely brilliant boss, Glenn Shields, who taught me how to code. And it just went from there because it was a matter of the world became much more clever with how we did things. So back in the day, showing my age, you'd do these things in Excel or you'd do these things using fairly simplistic methods. But as things got more complicated, your skills had to get more complicated and more advanced. So learned from colleagues and learned by going to courses in that just upskilling and also cross-skilling with team members because I'd be working with very pure engineers and they would be absolutely spectacular with writing the code, but they wouldn't necessarily have the great skills of asking the client why or helping the client unpack what they were trying to achieve. So the that translational piece has always been something I've worked well in because I haven't always been in the back end, I haven't always been in the front end, and so working across both just and then very much sharing information. So it is rather than saying to the engineer you need to do this because it's you need to do this because this will make it better, this is how we'll make it better. And then working with those engineers, they'll also come back and say, well, why don't you do it this way? Why don't you go back to the client and say, if you do it this way, that will actually achieve it better? So getting that multidiscipline approach to work has always had much better outcomes, and it also makes work a lot more fun because you're learning.
Yeah, there's two things I want to touch on that one that's just sprung to mind. One is, did you see the Nvidia CEO saying no one should learn to code moving into the new year's, moving forward? Nobody should ever learn to code. What are your thoughts around that? Firstly,
Like,
before we...
I have an 8-year-old who's learning to code. And it's important because everyone talks about large language models and AI. They're code-based systems, and if you don't understand how decisions are being made from a technical perspective, as in how and statements and if statements and very complicated statements like that are built, how can you engage with the software and how can you ask it to do things and how can you interrogate it? Because we know that technology is going to be bigger, and if you can't understand how it works, it makes it really hard to work with it well.
Yeah, I think that was more his strategy voiced out to the world so that he can make more market share. But yeah, do you think it's relevant still, like with degrees, etc., when you're hiring for your teams, for example? Would that be something you'd kind of go straight to? Do they have a degree, or what's your take on it?
I don't think you need to. I think the ability to learn and the passion to learn is much more important than necessarily a piece of paper. Because if someone looked at my pieces of paper, I don't have hard IT qualifications,
Yeah,
but I am curious and I will ask questions and I am open to learning. And I think that passion is much more important, especially degrees age out. Like the information changes, and so what you necessarily learned at university 20 years ago is no longer relevant, but your ability to structure an email, to speak respectfully, and to understand how to engage with people and how to make a reasonable pitch and argument, there you don't need a university qualification to learn that, but you do need a willingness to learn that.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. It's very refreshing to hear that because I think it's like I do agree, like degrees age. I think they're a very good point for people to build off. But it is like you've got someone who's passionate, they'll go and take the time to learn. Obviously, like for example, yourself, like you were curious, you want to learn programming, you learned off your boss, you learned off colleagues. So it's if you want to learn, you'll go and do it. And the ones who don't learn, they're obviously the ones who just want to sit back and kick their feet up and
maybe I could have been one of those who went and did a spur of the moment business management degree because I was 27 and had no education. I was like, I need to get something, so I went and did a business management degree, which I think I learned not a whole lot, but you get those practical skills and you get like knowledge that
Yeah.
seeps into the subconscious mind that you can actually, oh, I did learn something. But with coding, it's like a totally different style of learning. It's like it's not
Oh, it
practical.
is. It's theoretical and it's practical, but I don't think you need a university degree, but you do need to make sure you're getting some kind of uh, certifications to show that you have the foundational skills,
Yeah,
because you need to be able to document your work in a consistent way, but you don't necessarily learn how to do that very well at university. I don't know. I didn't learn how to do that.
what would you say?
um,
What would you say to some of our listeners, Vanessa, who will be listening and maybe they've done, for example, a business degree with small bits of code in it or small elements of SQL queries, and has done a certificate in maybe machine learning that obviously isn't very advanced, and that person wants to break into the field and really make a name for themselves, but doesn't have maybe the financials or doesn't have the willpower to want to do a 4-year degree and put the head down for 4 years, wants to break in. What advice would you give to those type of people?
Go to the day courses. There's so many amazing boot camps and 1 day courses where you learn really useful, appropriate information in really applicable ways in 1 day courses, and often they're free. Like, there's so many amazing events out there, and the big companies, the Microsofts, the Amazons, Harvard, universities do free courses. You don't have to spend a fortune. You don't have to invest 4 years to be able to upskill. Having that piece of paper, though, even if it is from Microsoft or some kind of accreditation, I think is needed to get those jobs, unless you have a personal in, unless you are able to through your network be able to, so you have someone that will vouch for you and get you in that
Yeah,
way. You need to be able to quantify that you can actually do the job.
yeah. I agree with that on the search as well, because we would have a lot of people who would say, like, hi, Sean, I really want to break into data engineering. I've done a Azure DP 100 cert. I'm qualified data engineer. It's like, you've done that sort of cert, but there's a lot more to it. Like, they aren't the foundational break-ins. I think what you've mentioned around the free courses, I'm just doing so many different ones to get your head around the full picture, is definitely good advice for sure.
Well, and it's also useful to have other people challenge how you're doing things, because, if you're doing the same thing the same way and you've been doing it that way for a couple of years, chances are it's a good opportunity to have someone to respectfully maybe give you some feedback or some critique on your work, always in a very respectful, collaborative way, because no one ever likes to get feedback that isn't constructive. But it's
Yeah.
going to those kinds of events. It will often get you to challenge how you're doing things in a really constructive way.
Yeah, books as well. I've seen a lot around like fundamentals of data engineering books. Like those are almost a 4-year degree condensed into
Yeah.
300 pages. There's a good
Oh,
few out
and
there.
you're so right. And podcasts like this.
Like exactly.
Do you have any books or any courses off the top of your head that you'd recommend for people that are interested to go and look into or go and attend if they can?
So I went to a brilliant session last year, and there's actually one coming up very soon in Brisbane. It's called AI Bootcamp,
Mhm.
and it's actually a totally free event. So it's sponsors who make it all happen. And it's called an AI Bootcamp because it's hosted at the the Queensland AI Hub. And they talk about AI, and that's definitely something that's a common stream in it. But there's so much information about Power BI. And last year they had someone actually talking about how to write a resume if you're trying to break into engineering. So
Mhm.
actually getting guidance on how to write your CV. And one of the things the recruiter was saying is, if you don't have a proven history, you need to demonstrate your skills. So set up a website where the person getting your CV can click in and they can see a wiki page of what you can do. So if you don't have a proven career history, but you can still demonstrate your skills. And he was very much advocating for getting those Microsoft certifications or getting those Python certifications or whatever your platform of choice is. And he was saying, also, because if you can, try and have a bit of diversity in platforms as well, so show that you're not just a pure Microsoft person. Maybe throw a bit of Salesforce or throw a bit of Snowflake in there as well.
Yeah. What would you say? I've seen a recent article around the kind of breakdowns of clouds and the domination of AWS. I think it was 2023. AWS had 33% of the market, and Azure and Microsoft had 22%. Google was 10. I put up a poll today on LinkedIn to see is that changing, because so many businesses are now talking Azure, Microsoft, Databricks. We want to use it. What do you think the most common clouds, or what way they're going? Do you think Microsoft might top the chart soon?
I think Microsoft, they're such a consistent performer, as in they roll it's very consistent, well structured pieces, so they're always going to be well trusted, and that's what makes them so strong. I've only ever had great experiences with AWS, and there's some absolutely amazing AWS people the school my daughter goes to. There's some absolutely amazing people who work there, and they're so smart and they're so clever, and they're so outcome orientated for their clients as well. So when I see them in social settings, they are just come across as genuinely kind people who aren't just over. They're not just about the dollars. They're about actually achieving positive outcomes. So
Yeah.
when there's these huge organizations, but you actually speak to the people who work there, they really care, which is, I think, the most telling thing about the company. If you have people who work there who are passionate and they care about their clients and they care about what their clients are trying to achieve.
I think that's a very big thing. It's as long as you can come across as a genuine person, which we said on the flip side when companies are recruiting for people, they want someone who obviously cares about their work. You have to be good at it. But like if you have that passion and you care about what you do, you'll always kind of go that extra mile or you always actually do it correctly. When it's
Yeah.
suddenly you, that's why we see people plateau and, you know, they could do their work with their eyes shut. And that's when you kind of get a bit lazy, a bit complacent, so to speak. You lose that
Oh,
passion.
definitely. But also from a purely harsh sales perspective, if you're someone who comes across as trustworthy and outcome focused, your clients are going to trust you. They're going to be more likely to buy products off you. They're going to be more likely to stay with the product longer because they feel like they're supported and trusted and empowered. So it just makes good sense for the product and it makes good sense for the business, and it's better for everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going to say it might be a bit of a bias to you, Sean, but I do think as well, like Australians, we kind of like that more genuine, very friendly approach. Whereas I know in certain other cultures, it is very like you want to be sold into it. You want to be like it's all about you, all about the dream. Whereas I feel here it's very, especially you could talk coming from Sunshine Coast, nice laid back approach, very chill.
Yeah. Whereas in Ireland, it's like the total opposite. Everyone is just. I actually had this conversation with my partner literally the other day. We were talking about the difference, well, from my perspective, because I did recruitment in Ireland for 3 years before I came here, and my partner has just started recruitment in Australia in the healthcare space. And she's like, "It's just so good over here. I just love it." I was like, "You have no idea what recruitment is like back in Ireland. It's like not to say anything on the market, but I think it's because the weather over here is so good. Everyone wants to go out, grab a coffee, say hello. Everyone's in a good spirit, good mood, waking up. Whereas in Ireland, 9 months of the year, it's cold, dark, snowy. People don't even want to leave their office to buy a coffee for themselves, let alone meet a recruiter for a coffee. So it's quite transactional from that perspective in Ireland, whereby you've got them for a minute. It's not so relationship orientated. It's more, I've got someone, this is the way it is. But yeah, definitely I prefer the Australian market for sure, because everyone's a lot more friendly and bubbly.
In my previous role, I worked very heavily in the Salesforce space, and the account managers at Salesforce, geez Louise, they would go above and beyond, and they were so passionate around how do we achieve the absolute best outcome, and because it was a non-for-profit, it was how do we achieve the absolute best outcome while minimizing the financial impact on the organization, and that was their reason for that was their role, and they were really passionate about it. And sometimes it would be a really quick email of, hey, I need to do this. What's the timeline? What would the cost be? And it might just be an email that is 2 sentences to the point, because work is busy, or it might be that they would reply back of a, hey, in between meetings, this is the information you need, talk to you later. So sometimes it was very warm and relationship based and chilled. But other times it could be very transactional depending on what the time frame was. But it was the the relationship meant that you felt you did feel like you could do sometimes you just needed a really quick answer and you could ask that. But yes, it's a very soft culture, and everyone wants that chance to get to know each other before business starts.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's Australian way. But I'm going to take the conversation on a little bit of a turn because I'd love to kind of focus on that bit within the non-for-profit sector. Like I said, a lot of your career has been in that. I think this will be quite interesting to a lot of people. What's your experience been like in the tech world, in the engineering world, in the non-for-profits? Because I think a lot of people, unless you work in there, you just have a perceived idea that everything might be on a shoestring budget or there's not much investment, although I think that's not necessarily the case. What was it like working non-for-profit within this space?
Non-for-profits are very, very technologically advanced. Especially the natural disasters that have occurred in the last 15 years in Australia and the pandemic have forced charities to make sure that every single dollar goes as far as it possibly can. And Australia has some of the highest density of non-for-profits in the world. So it is an incredibly competitive space. It is it's an incredibly competitive space with a relatively small population as well. So if charities want to succeed, they need to be smart and they need to speak to people how they want to be spoken to. So it's very much you need to understand who the customer is, and you need to understand them well. And the non-for-profit sector is really unusual in that the generally people give different amounts at different times of their life based on when you can make donations. And so it's a sector which is still very heavily involved in postal mail.
Keeping Australia Post alive.
Yeah. And so but post is expensive. And so when you're needing to write those letters that you get in the mail generally around tax time and Christmas time, charities who do them well invest huge amounts of skill into designing those so they are impactful, and they're impactful to the person receiving them. So there might be many versions of the letter down to different color envelopes, and because people will respond to envelopes that maybe look bright and colorful and have a picture of a Labrador puppy looking sad, or they might, depending on their gender and their age, they might react more to a letter that looks more businesslike. And so there's huge amounts of tech that goes into designing them, and that's not even to mention communication journeys. So those triggered text message and email journeys. So it's a matter of needing to maintain that postal mail that often have incredible amounts of effort that go into designing them, because they can be done as granular as what time of year does someone normally give. And so making sure that letters are going out to those people, because we know maybe they normally only give at a certain time of year. And if you send them letters at other times of year, it really annoys them and they'll stop giving. So it's doing that incredibly detailed piece around analysis. But because it's not for profit, that analysis is often done by someone who's wearing about 6 different hats, who maybe did a master's degree in religious conflict, and is likely also someone who's working part-time. So, and that's how non-for-profit are able to do this, because they find people who are willing to wear multiple hats, who are willing to constantly learn and use their time really efficiently, so that they'll have tech that is clever, but there'll be a very narrow tech stack. So they'll be very targeted with what tech will be used, and you'll often find that people that you wouldn't even expect to be able to use that tech will be incredibly competent at using it, because it needs to be, the receptionist needs to be able to do it, and someone in finance also needs to be able to jump in and tweak something. So it's so much more cross-skilling. But yes, the non-for-profit space is very, very clever. And I would put it out there, if you ever see an application coming across your desk with someone from a non-for-profit space and they don't look like quite the right fit, give them a call, have a chat, because they've probably worn multiple different hats and they're going to be able to be very flexible and acquire new information well.
Yeah, I think that's really awesome to hear. And it makes a lot of sense, obviously, with having to wear multiple hats. How did you find like trying to, if you had to promote any change, whether it was looking at a new technology or even like a different way of working with an existing technology, how was that kind of received by the business, like within the not-for-profit world?
I It's probably the same as it would be in the commercial world. You need to make a business case. You need to show what the benefit is, and the benefit needs to have a significant focus on what the dollar impact is. You need to show return on investment. You also need to show scalability and sustainability. So new products that aren't well tested or that aren't it might be new to the Australian market. Smaller organizations may not be able to take on the risk of learning something new when there isn't a wide base of people to bounce off and learn off. And yeah, so it's any time that I've been proposing new systems or new platforms or upgrades, it's very much looking at what is the benefit and is this the most cost effective way to achieve the benefit? And also who can then use it? How will it be sustained? And not just sustained initially at rollout, how will it be sustained 2 years down the track? Because you don't implement new tech to only plan to use it for 3, 6 months.
Yeah, it sounds like it's obviously a very long journey. You need the right sort of person, right? Who's obviously invested, proactive in their thinking, and kind of likes that challenge. I guess I was going to ask, like, with that in mind, what advice would you give anyone who wants to either move into the non-for-profit sector or like that's an area that they're working towards?
Yeah, I can add on to that. I'm working with a lady at the moment who is actually very, very interested in getting into not-for-profit with a specific organization because her mother is going through the process of registering with a specific not-for-profit, and that's kind of the experience she's had. While it's been good with that specific not-for-profit, but that's kind of totally changed her career direction. She was consulting, retail, like nothing to do with not-for-profits or even care facilities or anything like that. But now she's like all guns blazing. I want to get in. How do I get in? So she probably could listen to this and will benefit from. Yeah.
Be prepared for a pay cut. So
Yeah.
charities cannot match the private sector, but what they can't pay in dollars, there's salary sacrificing, which can significantly increase your pay. So increase your take-home pay. Be prepared to wear a couple different hats. Even if it's a very defined position description, chances are there's going to be some role creep. But it's so having that openness to the pay cut's important because I don't think people always realize like
Yeah.
money's important. You need to, but you need to have a job that feels good and fills your heart and uses your brain. But it's also just putting it out there. It's something that the sector does struggle with, and so that's why sometimes it's really hard to recruit great people because of these salary constraints. But one of the things that my experience is there was much more openness to potentially part-time roles. So if you have someone who is absolutely amazing, but really they're a primary carer for a parent, or they have a parent who's unwell, or their family requires flexibility, it's a job where you potentially, or a career more accurately, where you could potentially go in and do some really great things, but still also get the flex around that you need around your work-life balance. So potentially you could work school hours, or you could work 3 days a week or 4 days a week. They're a sector which, to my experience, is more open to having those conversations if the applicant is able to bring something really special.
Yeah. It boils down to the old saying, you've got to be passionate about what you do, isn't it? So it's like if that is where you want to go, you're going to go there some way or another. One thing I wanted to ask Vanessa as well was just kind of backtracking a little bit to when you were talking about the marketing for, I don't know whether it was the not-for-profits or what exactly it was, but the envelopes that you would do for different strategies. How do you avoid, for me as a consumer, to everything on the internet pretty much subscribe. I get a lot of emails from like businesses nearly on a 2-day basis. Marketing is just like constantly coming in with different things, and I'm like block. There's too much of this. How do you get that fine balance from I'm annoying these guys? Like where does the analytics piece come into understanding that?
So that would be a matter of looking at the communication journey. So if you're sending out emails to people who have low levels of engagement, who maybe haven't opened one of your emails in the last 18 months, your chances of getting them to do something are fairly low. So you can either take two routes, or you just keep spamming them. Oh, not spamming, because we of course would always apply a line to the Spam Act in Australia, so it would never be spam. Um, because that is something taken very seriously in Australia, as is the privacy legislation. Um, but it'd be a matter of, you can either just keep doing those really wide level emails and getting very low level responses, which is, it works reasonably well. Sending out those really high volume emails is actually very inexpensive. And so even if you're only getting a very small percentage of people responding and re-engaging, it's not bad ROI. The other way is to be much more targeted and to invest the resources to really understand why their email has appeared in your database, and really understand what interests them, and go out with information that's very specific to the person. But the catch is, if they've just signed up on, if all the information you have is a first name and an email address, it can be really hard to be personalized. Which is when you can then go down the lines of, there's companies which will rent consumer information, so then you can enrich information with those kinds of elements. But it just, a well-written email subject heading, and also maybe following up with text messages, is a really efficient way to communicate. But well-written comms is a skill.
It is a very big skill. Maybe everyone needs to go sort of background that you had, do those degrees to help with it, the communications
Yeah,
one.
it's all
I'm
leaking
not a
in
very
now.
good writer, but I'm good at using data to tell stories, but I'm not very good at the actual writing per se. But I understand who is, and I know what information they need to write a compelling story. So I know what statistics they need, or I know
Perfect.
or I'll do data mining to find a really, really engaging case study, and then I'll give it to the writer of, hey, I found this story in our system. They will be a perfect case for Christmas appeal or tax appeal. They're a really great engaging story.
Yeah, nice. I think that's a skill in itself, being able to identify what you're strong at and where you can see strength in others and work together towards the same goal.
Yeah, well, and James and I have also spoken about it. It's you get bored doing the same thing every day, so you also want to stretch those muscles and have some diversity in your work. Go and do something fun, and do something that you don't necessarily like doing data mining every day. Some people do it very well and they're very, very good at it. But if that's not something that you work in every day, actually going and getting your fingers a bit dirty and going and looking at the information that's in your system can be a really great way to illuminate opportunities.
I think it's awesome. I think
Yeah. Well, where do you think moving forward? Obviously, you mentioned there's a lot of competition within that not-for-profit space, and obviously Australia being one of the most not-for-profits in the world. Where do you see the biggest challenges in the not-for-profit space?
The new privacy legislation.
I was about to say that's a really broad picture, and to get a straight
The new
answer,
privacy
that must be
legislation,
tough. Yeah.
yeah, that's because there's going to bring in whole new rules, and we don't know how. The federal government haven't indicated how much of a change the legislation is going to make, but it could be really significant. And also, the use of AI is can be really potentially impactful, depending on what the regulation requirements in that space are going to be.
yeah, obviously AI being quite a big topic, it's how you
Yeah.
approach it, how you kind of embed it within your processes. That it's either going to be a very big benefit and help you, or it's going to become a bit of a hindrance and open a few wormholes.
So I use it personally, but I'm very careful about using it professionally, because it's something where there's currently very strict rules in the organization I work about how to use it. So while it's being developed, I don't use it professionally. I use take learnings from it on how can I apply it. But there's a lot of very strict rules and regulations how it can currently be used in the workplace. I think it has a lot of opportunity, and that's why I'm enjoying going to events to understand how to use it. I think I was at a session last year with an American woman called Regina Grogan, and one of the things she was speaking about AI is the human cost of it. And that was something which was incredibly important to be shared. And I think something that really misses from that story of the actual human cost of AI. So the companies that are doing all the skimming of the internet, of all the things that shouldn't be considered by this tech, that's done by humans who are spending their days in the worst parts of the internet. And so the actual cost of human life in order to enable these products is actually pretty horrific. And so it's trying to understand how to use these products ethically and how to use them in order to do my role is something that I think will be continuing to learn in for many years.
Yeah, very nice. I think it makes a lot of sense, especially with the having regulations. But I like the way you're looking at it is you do it in your personal life to better off how you can do your work with reducing the risk.
I kind of get the sense that if I was a leader in the industry, which I'm not, but if I was in the AI space, it's almost like you want someone else to trial and test and burn and see and learn from their failures rather than going all guns blazing, which it seems everyone has just jumped on the LLM ChatGPT train and everyone wants to know all about it and embed it. But it's like, there's no point running all guns ahead. You've got to get your ducks in order before you really go forward with it, or else you're going to find yourself backtracking a hell of a lot down the line.
Oh, definitely. And there's been some big failures. It's not new tech, but it's tech that is evolving rapidly. And the hallucinations that can come through if people don't know how to spot them, if people aren't verifying their information, the ramifications can be catastrophic for business. So being very careful on how they're using it, when they're using it, and how they are verifying it.
Yeah, I think some people get caught up in that with ChatGPT. They just put the company information straight on that, and suddenly you've put something where you shouldn't.
It's like AI is like with LinkedIn, for example. We get prompted to say, "Oh, we've been chosen as this specialist in your field to write this beautiful article to help us." But no, LinkedIn have let go of their whole marketing team so that they can now get this done through automation.
Yeah.
Well, little do they know, they're prompting every Tom, Dick, and Harry to do these articles. Those guys are using AI to do the articles. It's like AI is prompting you, but AI is learning from AI. It's like, how's that going to work?
Oh, totally. And it's, but also, is the model they're using, how is it being taught to remove bias? How's it being taught what the right information is? And so it's tricky.
Yeah, it's really interesting to say that because we actually had another lady on a podcast not too long ago and talking about pretty much the exact same thing about all these models that are being built. They need to be built by diverse people so that you're not just having the one viewpoint, essentially. Like you're not just having, say, all these people in Silicon Valley building these models and they've all got kind of the same way of thinking, and that suddenly these models start saying, obviously, what they would say. So you need different viewpoints.
Oh, exactly. So I was at a conference yesterday and there was a fellow presenting from Taylor Fry, and he was advocating for AI is so powerful, but don't just use it because of the buzzword. Actually understand why you're wanting to use it and what benefit you will get from using it, and understand, is AI the only way you can achieve that benefit? Because it is new, because it is complex, it may not be the most cost efficient way to achieve that success. So really understand why you're wanting to use the tools, so you can use them in an appropriate way, and use them in a way that actually helps you achieve what you're wanting to achieve.
Yeah, I think it's such a good example because it's people get too caught up in the buzzwords. It's like anything in life. Like you'll see something like, oh, get caught up. You want to do that. You want to jump on the bandwagon. But it's even like, I'm sure you can test this as well. 2018, 2019, there's a big increase in data scientists and like companies recruiting them. 12 months later, they're like, we've hired 5 data scientists. We actually need engineers because we're not set up for data scientists. And like it's
that's actually a really good point.
So, and even I think even over COVID, we saw heaps of companies build these massive cloud data warehouses or data lakes, and a lot of them now have been like, oh, we're using pretty much a puddle in this lake, so why are we paying for all this? Like, we need to. So I'm worried that might happen with AI if everyone jumps on the bandwagon. You'll see a number of companies that go to remove it. So I like that point of thinking about what you're actually trying to solve, and is this the best case?
That's the most groundbreaking analogy I've heard. Really, no, it really is. I'm like, yeah, that actually makes so much sense. It's like, what do you need to get in place before you go down this AI train? Because it was data science. We've got all our stats, but it's like, you need to have a database to put it into.
Well, and there's this huge opportunity. We have an aging population where we have people who are now starting to transition towards their last phase in the workforce. Use them to train these AI models, because they have huge amounts of intellectual knowledge and intellectual property and wisdom. Don't just let it leave. They use these people to train the models, vector their information. As people are aging out of the workforce, we're going to really feel the loss of that wisdom. And it's such a great opportunity to start documenting their information. Documentation is people think it's such a boring thing, but it is foundational. And when it isn't done well, you feel it. And especially when those amazing people leave organizations, if their decision makings, methods and their approaches haven't been documented, they're gone.
I wonder is that's what Elon Musk is thinking in the background with his brain chips. Implement them in people who've got a year left in the business. Train everything. That's our documentation.
It's really interesting to say that, because I've actually never thought about that in relation to like the data and the tech space. Because like the car brain coming out is like, I know a lot of those like older trades where like it's all hands on, like that skills aren't being taught generation because people aren't going to that. Like, for example, Rolls-Royce has someone who hand paints all the little finer details on the car, and the joke is he's got the steadiest hand in the world. He'll retire in the next 10 years and there's no one to take over that. And I haven't thought about that in relation to tech. Yeah, we do have a lot of people that are going to be leaving this industry in the next 10 or so years, and they're going to be taking a shit ton of information with them.
Oh yeah, because they're the ones who know all the legacy systems that we're trying to move onto clouds.
Yeah, and it's not an easy job.
Yeah. No, and it's a complex job, and it's really hard for people in younger generations because the structures of these systems isn't structured the way we're used to systems now being done with, with nice, neat warehouses and data dictionaries and all those things that we're just used to having. These are legacy systems that don't necessarily have that really defined structure. So it's really important that we start capturing that information, because otherwise there'll be a significant information debt.
Yeah. Shout out to all the mainframe developers listening. Get your boots back off.
And documentation, like something that my team do now is that we every week a couple hours goes into documentation without fail, because if you push it out, if you just keep pushing it out each week of too busy, it'll never get done. And then someone goes on annual leave, someone goes on sick leave, and then you realize, oh, where's that code, and where was the final version of the client's requirements, and why was that logic applied in the coding? Why was that field used rather than this field?
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen companies before where they've had one person who they didn't want to do any documentation, and so they never pushed through documentation. They've gone to leave, and suddenly you've got data analysts who's moved on, and no one knows how to do anything because there's nothing's been documented. Look, I would love to ask you one last question just before we wrap up. Obviously, like I said, whole career's pretty much been in the non-for-profit space, now moving to the health space, which also, as a side note, I think is kind of a nice little 360. Like you said, your mum worked in that space, now you're back there as well. Maybe your daughter will follow suit. What would you, if you could get your hands on like a specific data set or like some company's data, what would it be? Or which company would it be and why?
So as a mother who recently got a very upset child because we couldn't get Taylor Swift tickets, I would have loved to be able to work out the algorithm to be able to get one of those tickets. That would have made me the most popular person in my little girl's life. But there's
Is there a true way of doing it? Let me know if you found out.
Yeah, I know. The considering how much it was going to cost just to go down to Sydney, though, I don't think I could afford to see her when she's still performing. But then there's companies like Netflix and Spotify who there's such a strong argument of the people who provide their skills to do their products aren't getting paid fairly, and that information's not available. So it'd be so cool to be able to get those companies to actually release that information to make sure that the people creating that art are paid fairly.
I love that. You're definitely like a warrior of making sure everyone's paid equally. Everyone's paid fairly, treated fairly.
Yeah, yeah, and it's the well, because so again, probably showing my age. Triple J is absolutely adore it and spend a huge amount of time listening to Triple J. But Triple J and Spotify is where I got my music. And then you read articles about how much the artists are getting paid, and it is so pathetic. And they're putting their heart and soul and their all their time into creating this. And yeah, so it's that thing of if you want someone to do something well, they have to be able to put food on their table. Big companies have a lot of power and don't necessarily have to share things. So it'd be great to be able to hold those companies accountable to being fair. Like everyone's entitled to make money, and these company, the people who work at those Spotify and Netflix companies, geez Louise, they put in their day, they put in their hours. They are companies that the people who work there work hard. Um, and so they're very much, I think, entitled to their high salaries because they are doing 14, 15-hour days. But it'd also be great to have the artists who are putting information into them also compensated.
I love that. I
Yeah.
think it's a nice little note to end it on, making sure that, if you're getting paid, you're paid properly for the work that you're doing.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
really good.
That is good. That is good.
Perfect. Well, look, thank you so much, Vanessa, for jumping on. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We hope that you've taken something away from this.
Yeah, that
Thank
was
you for having me, Sean and James.
great to hear your journey. Very much appreciated.
So something really important for us here at Precision Sourcing is mental health. It's something we've been focused on a lot over the last year or so, and we're lucky enough to have partnered with the Black Dog Institute. And we're going to be doing a lot of events with them this year. A lot of our events, money will be going towards them. And they're out there aiming to create a mentally healthier world for everyone. So if you wish to support the cause, please donate via the link in the bio on this podcast, and you'll be seeing a lot more information about Black Dog over the next year.